Miseducation. I'll admit I was not a big fan of it. Outside of X Factor, which is just one of the
that still blows my mind. How was somebody in the late 90s world not loving Lauryn Hill?
I was talking about my experience. You just went on a whole thing about your experience.
I just wanted to put a footnote on that. How was somebody out here not liking Lauryn Hill? Go on.
I don't see. I like her.
How do we want to start out?
You can start introducing ourselves. What's the name?
Why don't we introduce each other?
Okay.
Okay.
What's the name of it?
It's called Chai and Gray.
Okay.
A date night with the doctors. Okay. So next time we should probably have a cup of tea with us for this.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for another episode of
Chai
and Gray, Date Night with the Doctors. Where are you reading right now?
Well, in these quarantine times, I've got a number of books. What I'm focusing on now is a great little book called She Begat This by Joan Morgan that's been out for about 1.5 years now. It came out for the 20th anniversary of Miseducation, and with some bias, I love this book. So when Joan Morgan,
that's why I heard so much Lauryn Hill today.
Yeah, that's like the soundtrack to my day, and perhaps my week. Well, that speaks to the relevance that you can still bop to Lauryn Hill more than 20 years later.
Was Hazel bopping to it?
Hazel was bopping to whatever I'm listening to.
Well, she was bopping to Michael Jackson yesterday. I mean, before I knew it, that's our 4-year-old daughter. Before I knew it,
she's got great musical taste.
Okay, because I was in the car, and all of a sudden I realized that we were parked, and this little girl was dancing with me to "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough."
Okay.
And I was like, "What do you know about Don't Stop Till You Get Enough?" But back to Lauryn.
yeah. So she's developing her own musical ear, and I would love for Lauryn Hill to be a part of that catalog because I have so many great memories, and I just think it's great music. One of the things that the book She Begat This mentions is the kind of political context swirling around young Black bodies during that time. And I think she does a great job of really cataloging for us why Lauryn Hill at that moment was so important into the late 90s, when you had artists like Little Kim and Foxy Brown, that Lauryn Hill really steps into that moment and creates a sound that was unanticipated. And I think it's to offer binaries is always problematic. But she does provide this kind of antithetical voice to what is happening in hip hop at that moment. That's important.
Well, what I remember about that time is when Lauryn Hill hit, when she was still with the Fugees. You know, it was one thing. It was just this dope female MC and with this dope group. And was enjoying it. Then when she came out with the Miseducation, I'll admit I was not a big fan of it. Outside of X Factor, which is just one of the
that still blows my mind. How was somebody in the late 90s world not loving Lauryn Hill?
I was talking about my experience. You just went on a whole thing about your experience.
I just wanted to put a footnote on that. How was somebody out here not liking Lauryn Hill? Go on.
I didn't say I didn't like her. Poets, and then not only that, some type of way they all started to develop northern New Jersey accents. Some of them still have their northern New Jersey accents, and they were living in Buffalo. And I was just like, wow, she's having some impact on them.
Yeah,
like, she changed the way they talk. I remember the way they were talking, last month, and this album has come out, and a CD at that point, and now they all of a sudden changed their dialects.
So she had this major impact on Black artists. I think Black female artists from that point forward. Would you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not as major as one as I would hope to have been.
Okay.
Because, and I say that because they didn't follow her lead with the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't follow her lead with her on stage presentation.
You're talking about artists you knew, or like nationally ranked artists?
Nationally ranked artists.
Okay.
It didn't. It was two people who I thought was major at that point, and I would have hoped to have seen the music industry kind of flow that way,
Mm-hmm.
and the music industry took a different. Went to a different direction, and that's Lauryn Hill and Jill Scott.
Oh, okay.
Now,
Okay.
Jill Scott, I was in love with her
Mm-hmm.
from minute one.
But we've talked about this. That was intentional on the part
Yes.
of corporations to own Black sound.
And also, Jill Scott was with, at the time, an independent label.
Mm-hmm.
Hidden Beach was independent. Jill Scott has not sounded like the Jill Scott of when she was with Hidden Beach,
Mm-hmm.
since Hidden Beach got bought out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a big thing. But at that time, you had Lauryn Hill, you had Jill Scott, you had Floor Tree that came out.
Mm-hmm.
And they all had this organic sound, and their lyrics were like, man, you know, they had some massive lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
But then, and you know how I feel about Beyonce, then it became all it became Destiny's Child and Beyonce, and female artists had to do that outside. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a few outliers, you know, all the time.
Right.
But I mean, there's the Jasmine Sullivans,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, but they didn't have the spirituality
Okay.
that Lauryn Hill had in her music,
Mm-hmm.
or even the spirituality that Jill Scott had.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily had to be Christian,
Mm-hmm.
but it was just a deeper understanding of themselves, and deeper understanding to the music that they were conveying,
Mm-hmm.
and their images. I mean, these women were beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
They were visually just beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't have to come out and say, "I'm beautiful."
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have to come out glammed up. They didn't have to do those things. In fact, they were more natural. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Jill Scott came out with the fro. Lauryn Hill had locks.
Mm-hmm.
Floor Tree had locks. You know, like so. You know, they had more organic look,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, I mean, this term is overused somewhat, but a natural look.
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeling that. I was vibing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as a young Black church girl, this was also music that perhaps your parents gave a sigh of relief for. You know, like, here was something, a way that you could finally be a part of the culture.
Okay.
For me. She was saying things that in some ways were part and parcel to what I was going to be hearing in church. So there was that. And I mean, when you think about the connection between the Black church and hip hop in the late 90s, going into the early millennia, this politics of respectability that kept those two apart in some ways. In many other ways, they mirrored each other. But if you were in the Black church, you've got the iconic image of Calvin Butts, Reverend Calvin Butts, which has kind of been overused and underexplored what he was really trying to do. But that's the image of the Black church.
Okay.
Sending steamrollers over rap albums, you know, and that like is the pervasive image throughout the 1990s. I have
no problem with it.
Well, what he was really saying was
out of control.
Right. Yeah, and he even talks about the fact that he's not against rap music.
No, he wasn't at all.
There were certain lyrics, but that becomes the presentation of the black church.
The stuff that he was steamrolling needed to have been steamrolled.
Okay.
And I don't know if I'm a hip hop head, but man, like, Public Enemy dropped when I was in college, and I was a campus DJ, and I remember, how I made all the white folks mad when I played Public Enemy on my radio show, and I didn't even have their CD or the album at the time. I recorded it off the radio and put it on. And when it dropped, I was getting phone calls into my booth, cussing me out, calling me names. And I was like, well, they must be telling the truth. Yeah. Got all of you upset. And I mean, like, Tribe Called Quest, the Native Tongues, I came of age during the golden age of hip hop. And so then all of a sudden, 92, 93, it comes to an end. The Chronic comes out. And Dr. Dre goes from saying, I don't smoke cess, to doing the Chronic. So, yeah. I mean, that was such a, like, okay, the last time we saw you, you were saying you don't smoke weed. And then the next one, you named your album Weed.
So do you think Lauryn Hill was a kind of return to the golden age of hip hop, or was she something else?
I think she was I don't think it was a return. I think she and the Roots were the continuation of what was going on in the whole northern New Jersey, New York hip hop scene. That's what I think. I mean, them and Naughty by Nature, there's a few of them. Yeah. They were just a continuation of what was going on in that scene.
Yeah, and when you think of Afrofuturism's rise throughout this time, and now the kind of resurgence of that conversation around certain artists and festivals and even scholarship, that she's kind of central to that in people's mind really begins to push the conversation forward to me. And why when I think of a text like this coming out 20 years later, it feels so timely. So it's not only harping back to what the 90s were, the moment that she steps into, but telling us about really the shape of hip hop today. And I will argue the necessity of Lauryn Hill's kind of ideas, thoughts carrying forward. I think she's one of those artists that has stood the test of time.
Well, I would like to see that carried forward into film also. What has been going on in Black film has been incredible. And I just hope that doesn't get co-opted and becomes something else. I mean,
well, I think that's a really good segue into talking about your film for today, because I'm watching. I'm reading. You're watching. To meld
I can't read.
Our desire. So you said. I'm sorry, that was low-hanging fruit. To meld our interests. If I had to pair a book with a film, I think it would be She Begat This with Black Panther. If one could do that, like wine.
I'm going to read my quote.
Wine and cheese.
I'll just drink wine and you eat the cheese. So anyway. So read your quote.
Oh, so one quote that I love from this, one of the things that this book does is allows Joe Morgan to kind of curate a conversation with other friends, academics, writers, dancers, people who live through hip hop, and are mostly female telling this story. And one of them comes from Angela Davis, and she says on page 51, in some ways, Lauryn defined a new category for us because her body was the intersection of so many different Black girl aesthetics. what made her fascinating was the way she signaled these multiple spaces of blackness in her style. She could signal her hip hop, signal her glamour, and signal her sexy, sometimes all at the same time. She pulled them all together and made it work. So in the late 90s, this is old news if you're listening and you are a dark-skinned black girl
which I'm not.
who came out. So maybe you've overheard this conversation.
Oh, okay.
But that's what we loved about Lauryn Hill. You know, this was my first conversation on having natural hair.
Okay.
You know, that really started my journey, because usually whenever we talk about dark skin, especially for black women or dark skinned women's hair, it always becomes our origin story of trauma. You know, like, and this is when I found out I was ugly. You know?
You remember, I came from the mid 80s.
Okay.
It was all about El DeBarge, Prince, Michael Jackson, and we didn't also dark black men didn't get discovered until 1991 when Wesley Snipes came out in New Jack City.
Well, somehow
it was like, oh, the dark man discovered.
Somehow your generation danced their way right into the 1990s with those same harmful reads of black bodies. It was like it just carried it right on through.
It was so strange because we went through the late 80s, early 90s doing medallions. We went to this extreme Africanism, and I mean, even I had okay, it's hard to imagine now, but even I had a hairstyle where my hair went straight up and smoked back, and I had the angled haircut, and women were wearing the huge bamboo earrings that, like, we call them door knocker earrings. And I mean, I was huge into a group called X Clan at the time. And then all of a sudden, the Chronic came out. We're not African no more. We left the sands of West Africa. And we were in Compton. And it went like that until, so I'll give Lauryn Hill that. It went like that until Lauryn Hill came out with her natural look.
I would say we had some, we had a number of bright spots, but I would say by the time you get to Lauryn Hill, as the interview discusses, it was everything all at once. You still get to be glamorous. You still get to say dark skin is beautiful and have this very conscious message, and still be cute. And that was meaningful to me. Growing up, and I think to a lot of other black girls. So tell us a little bit about Black Panther.
Well, I think we ran out of time to talk about Black Panther, but one thing I want to see what happens when your wife just takes over the, this is what happens at date night. This is exactly what happens at date night. The wife takes over date night, takes over the discussion. Then after everything has been said, what do you have to say about?
I don't see any problem here.
Okay.
I think you're trying to.
But
there's a critique, but I'm not getting it here.
That's also being married. But I want to. This is a quote that I want to examine next week.
Okay.
Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships because they knew death was better than bondage.
That's a favorite.
It's a favorite.
Yeah.
But if they jumped into the ocean, were they your ancestors? Let's kick it about that next week.
To be continued. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Bye.